Hello, back to Bible study again. And this time I'm going to talk about the woman at the well, or the Samaritan woman. And it is connected to the book of Jonah because, Jonah is the story of uh, Jonah avoiding preaching to the Ninevites, that is the capital of the Assyrians, because he knows that the Assyrians are going to attack Israel, where he's a prophet to the king Jeroboam. We went over all of that last week. But this particular Bible reading kind of ends the story in a way. A lot of things have transpired after, because Jonah did preach to the Assyrians. God spared them, and then he raised them up and sent them as a scourge against Israel, and it all fell. But not everybody left. There are still people. They call it Samaria, but they have a lot of leftovers from the Assyrian captivity, and other peoples, transported Assyrians for one, and other peoples living there too. So the Samaritan woman is kind of an end to the story, because you want to ask the question, well, what happened to the Samaritans? And it is they got saved too. And so this is an interesting one because it's controversial. And so I'm going to it's short because it's in the Gospel of John, and on 4th chapter, starting with verse 4 and going through probably verse 21, 27, and so forth. So, but it starts with Jesus going through this territory. So now Samaria, the Samaritans and the Jews didn't like each other. They both thought the other was wrong, and we sometimes assume the Samaritans had it all wrong and the Jews were completely right. Well, not by Jews I mean those of Judea in the southern kingdom. That's what I mean by that, not present-day Jews. And so it's not quite that simple, because the Samaritans think the Jews got it wrong, and they can point out the reasons why they thought so. But they worshipped at different places, because the Jews worshipped on Mount Sion. They went up the mountain to worship God and offer sacrifices. The Samaritans, on the other hand, worship Mount Gerizim. And so very different, but they didn't like each other. But this pericope, or this chapter, is about Jesus going through the Samaritan territory. Now, ordinarily, you go around. The way you go around is you go on the east side of the Jordan River all the way up to the Sea of Galilee. Well, that's a long way around. But I think Jesus wanted to go to Samaria because he loves all sinners, and he wanted to save them too. And so he goes to this town, and it's noon, which is the 6th hour, and some people speculate it's the hottest part of the day, but it really isn't. The 9th hour, about 3 o'clock. As you know, in the summer, mid-afternoon is a lot hotter than noon, because the sun's had a lot more opportunity to warm everything up. And so let me start reading. Jesus had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a city in Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and to Jesus, worried as he was with the journey, sat down beside the well, and it was about the 6th hour, or noon. So now the fact that he mentions Joseph is very important, because that's Joseph's grave. If you know the story of Joseph, how Joseph, the coat of many colors, that story, and how his brothers were so jealous, and they were going to kill him, and then they sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. And then Potiphar's wife took a liking to him because I guess he's one handsome and good-looking dude. So she was taken with him and tried to seduce him, and he didn't go for it. So, of course, that she was very vengeful after that. A woman scorned, there's no vengeance like a woman scorned. And so she reported him for terrible things, and he was imprisoned. And the rest of the story is he got a reputation of being able to interpret dreams. The Pharaoh was having troubling dreams, and then finally it came to his attention that Joseph could interpret for him, and he gave him the interpretations and good advice, and that's how they saved a lot during the time of plenty, and then were able to distribute food in a time of drought. And so that's where he met his family. But when he died, his bones were carried back to the Holy Land, and they were buried here at Sychar. So some people say is a connection between Joseph then, why would he put that otherwise, and the woman at the well, and that maybe Joseph was accused and had to suffer a lot at the gossip and accusations of others, but Joseph turns out to be the salvation of Israel. And the woman is also accused of being a fallen woman, but she turns out to be the salvation of Samaria, or we could say Israel, in the sense that Israel's the northern tribes. And so he sits at the well. Now, when we think of wells, we think of marriage, because all important marriages in the Old Testament they find their wives at wells. And so we think of marriage. But then we think of Jesus being the bridegroom, and he's looking for a bride. That is, all of us are a bride of Christ. When we go to heaven, we'll enter into the wedding banquet of the Lamb, and the groom will come and adorn his bride, which is the church. And so he is the bridegroom, looking to have that intimate relationship with all of Samaria as well as Israel. So then there came a woman of Samaria to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away to the city to buy food. Now, this is interesting that usually as Jesus is going to give, and he will later on give to her, but he always wants from us too. He wants us to commit to give our life. See, water is a symbol of life. So he asked for a drink, and she's taken it back. She gets real kind of nasty about it. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink for me, a woman, a Samaritan? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." And Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with." She had a water jar with her, so you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. And where are you going to get this living water? Are you greater than Jacob, who gave us this well and drank it from it himself and his sons and his cattle? And I think that's kind of a connection with Jonah, because the Ninevites repented, but also the cattle, which is kind of a way of saying they didn't have. It actually says in there they didn't know their right from their left, nor the cattle. In other words, they're kind of like the cattle. They didn't have a clue, and that's why God had to save them, but also to raise them up to punish Israel. So everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give will never thirst. And so he's saying, you're looking for the wrong things, and then he asked her, she said, "Go tell your husband to come here." And then she says, "Well, I have no husband." And he says to her, "You're right, you have no husband. You've had 5, and the man you're living with, your boyfriend now, maybe boyfriend, the man you're living with, is not your husband." And so, now this is the kicker on this one, because is she a fallen woman or not? because on the one hand, he is saying, look for your authority, look for your master, because in those days the men were the masters. Look for your master, looking here and there and everywhere, this husband, that husband. But you'd rather drink from the well that gives everlasting life. These others are just diversions. That could be one interpretation. Or, it could be said too that he doesn't seem to be admonishing her. It could be said that she had reasons for having so many husbands. Maybe they died, or maybe they divorced her. Men dumped women right and left because they could. Women could not divorce their husbands, but husbands could get rid of wives, especially if they didn't have children, or male children sometimes. They felt that they were non-productive and divorced them. So she might have had a lot of sorrow in her life. And maybe the man she's living with she's not living with him in sin, maybe. So the reason I say that is then she leaves and tells everybody about Jesus, and they all listen to her and go and see Jesus. And so if she was such an outcast, how come she had such connection with all the people of the community? So some scholars say, look, she was there at the 6th hour. That means she was avoiding the rest of the women because she was a fallen woman. Because you're supposed to go to the well at early in the morning where it's cool, or late at night. And here she is midday to avoid the crowds. But others say, well, maybe she's just wanting to be alone because she's depressed, because she's had so much sorrow in her life, and that Jesus was really saying, I know what you're going through. I know that you've had 5 husbands and all of that sort of stuff. So he might have been sympathizing her rather than accusing her. So that's the task for you, to read this. It's very short, to read this, and you decide, is she a fallen woman or not? I vote that she probably is. I think it reads more that way. But I'm just saying, this is the thing about Bible studies, is there are a lot of things that we believe about the Bible because we're taught by the church. But other things we're pretty free to decide for ourselves. So you can have an opinion. So I'd be interested to know what you think. Was she a fallen woman or was she not? But she was instrumental in bringing the people to Jesus, and that was their salvation. And so that kind of, in a way, ends the Jonah story. So I made it real quick, but we have to record these things, and we don't want to take too many gigabytes in order to do it. So they told me to keep it short. Somebody told me that they love my videos because they can turn them off. And they wish they could do the same thing in church. Ha, ha, ha. So anyway, we're done. Oh, I have to tell you too, the Good Samaritan is Francisco. He's the one who was videoed. So thank you, Francisco. Okay, bye.